I'm Alina Vance, 78 years old, a woman who has buried a husband, raised a son, and built a life on the foundations of love and hard work. And I am the woman whose only son told me my existence was conditional, that my worth as his mother hinged on my willingness to become a free, full-time nanny to his wife's children. He gave me a choice, my life or his. He never imagined I would choose my own. The house I sit in now is smaller than the one my David and I built, but it's mine. The silence is a comfortable blanket, not the suffocating shroud it once was. Every morning, the sun spills through the bay window in the kitchen, and I have my tea while I watch the finches at the bird feeder. It's a simple peace, but it is a peace I fought for. It is the spoils of a war I never wanted to wage against an enemy I had spent my entire life loving. My husband, David Vance, was a man carved from oak, strong, steady, and deeply rooted in the belief that a man's purpose was to build something that would outlast him. For 49 years, we were a unit. We moved as one, thought as one, and dreamed as one. We met at a church social in 1965. He was quiet, with hands that looked like they knew their way around an engine and a Bible both. I was drawn to his steadiness. He said he was drawn to my laugh, which he claimed could make the church rafters ring. We married a year later. Our dream wasn't extravagant. We wanted a home, a family, and a life filled with the quiet dignity of honest work. David was a master plumber, one of the first licensed black plumbers in our county. He worked tirelessly, his days long and his body aching when he came home. I worked as a school secretary for 30 years, organizing the lives of principals and hundreds of children, my hands always smelling of dittos and chalk dust. Together, every dollar we earned was a brick, every hour of overtime was mortar. We were building our legacy, a testament to our union, brick by painful brick. That legacy had a name, Marcus. He was our only child, the center of our universe. From the moment I held him, he was my heart walking around outside my body. David saw in him the future we were working for. Marcus would have it easier, we promised ourselves. He wouldn't have to fight the same battles we did. We poured everything into him, our savings, our hopes, our prayers. I remember when Marcus was about 10, he became obsessed with astronomy. He wanted a telescope more than anything in the world. The one he wanted, a Meade reflector telescope he'd circled in a catalog, cost nearly $300. For us in those days, that was a fortune. It was the grocery money for 2 months. David took on extra jobs for an entire summer, coming home long after dark, his knuckles raw and his face etched with exhaustion. He never complained. The night we gave Marcus that telescope for his birthday, his eyes were as wide and bright as the stars he so longed to see. He looked at his father and said, "Thank you, Daddy, you're the best dad in the whole universe." David just squeezed my hand, his weary face glowing with a pride that outshone any star. That was the kind of father he was. That was the family we were. When it was time for college, there was no question. Marcus was bright and he was going to a university. We cashed in the savings bonds we had so carefully accumulated. We took out a second mortgage on the house we had just finished paying off. I packed him lunches for my entire summer break and delivered them to his construction job to make sure he saved every penny he earned. He was the first in our family to get a degree. When he walked across that stage, cap and gown on, David and I held each other and wept. Every sacrifice had been worth it. Our son was an educated man with a future as wide as the sky. He met his first wife, Sarah, in college. She was a sweet, gentle girl, and we loved her. They gave us two beautiful grandchildren, David Jr. and Maya. For a time, our family was perfect. Sunday dinners were loud, joyous affairs. The house was filled with the sounds of children's laughter and the smell of my yeast rolls. But life has a way of testing the foundations you build. Marcus's ambition, the very trait we had nurtured, began to grow sharp edges. He started working longer hours at his finance job, chasing promotions and bonuses. The family dinners became less frequent. Sarah would call me, her voice thin, trying to hide her loneliness. The marriage frayed and eventually it snapped. The divorce was amicable on paper, but it left a deep crack in our family structure. Sarah moved back to her home state with the children to be near her own parents. We still saw them on holidays and for a few weeks each summer, but the easy, constant presence of our grandchildren was gone. A quiet sadness settled over our home. A few years later, my David got sick. The cancer was aggressive, a thief that stole him from me piece by piece. Marcus was there of coup. RSE, he was a good son during that time. He drove us to appointments and sat by his father's bed. But I could see the distraction in his eyes, the constant checking of his phone, the pull of his other life. When David passed, the silence in our big family home became a roar. The house, our monument to a lifetime of love and labor, felt cavernous and empty. It was just me and the echoes of a life that was. Grief is a strange tide. It pulls you under, and just when you think you found your footing, a rogue wave of memory knocks you down again. In the year after David's death, Marcus was my anchor. He'd call every day, visit every weekend. He'd sit in his father's armchair and tell me I needed to get out more, to rejoin my bridge club, to go back to my volunteer work at the church library. He was worried, and I loved him for it. I was so grateful for his attention that I didn't notice the subtle shift in his own life until the storm had already made landfall. Her name was Tiffany. Marcus met her at a work conference. He described her as vibrant, smart, and full of life. "She makes me feel young again, Mom," he told me, a sparkle in his eye I hadn't seen in years. I wanted him to be happy, truly I did. A man his age shouldn't be alone. So when he told me he was bringing her over for dinner, I spent 2 days cleaning the house and cooking all his favorite dishes. Pot roast, macaroni and cheese baked with 3 kinds of cheese, collard greens with smoked turkey, and a sweet potato pie from my own mother's recipe. Tiffany walked into my home like she was stepping onto a movie set where she was the star. She was beautiful, I couldn't deny that. Dressed in a bright red dress that probably cost more than my monthly utility bills, with nails perfectly manicured and a smile that was wide but didn't quite reach her eyes. She complimented everything, but her compliments felt like assessments. "Oh, Aliner, what a charming home, so much history." She ran a long, painted fingernail over the edge of David's handcrafted mantelpiece. She had 2 children from a previous marriage, 9-year-old twins named Brandon and Brittany. Marcus had told me about them, calling them great kids. When he introduced us, the boy, Brandon, just grunted and looked at his phone. The girl, Brittany, gave me a practiced, pageant-like smile and said, "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Vance." Tiffany beamed. "Aren't they just perfect?" Throughout dinner, Tiffany directed the conversation. She talked about her job in marketing, the brands she worked with, the vacations she'd taken. She laughed loudly at all of Marcus's jokes, touching his arm in a way that was both intimate and performative. My son, my serious, practical Marcus, was completely mesmerized. He hung on her every word, his face soft with an emotion I could only describe as adoration. I tried to ask about her children, to draw them out, but they remained glued to their tablets, their thumbs flying across the screens. Tiffany just waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, don't mind them, they're in their own little worlds." After that first meeting, things moved at lightning speed. Within 6 months, they were engaged. Another 6 months, and they were married in a lavish ceremony at a country club that I know Marcus couldn't afford on his own. I sat in the front pew, wearing a simple but elegant blue dress I'd bought on sale, feeling like a stranger at my own son's life. Tiffany's family and friends were loud, draped in designer labels, and they looked through me as if I were part of the floral arrangements. After the wedding, they moved into a large, modern rental home in an exclusive gated community an hour away. Marcus started talking about needing a fresh start. He sold the modest home he'd owned since his first marriage. The proceeds, I later learned, went toward paying for the wedding and furnishing their new life. It was a life curated by Tiffany, filled with gleaming white furniture, abstract art, and not a single photograph of his father or of his own children, David Jr. and Maya. Marcus began to change. His daily calls became every few days, then weekly. His language shifted. He started using corporate jargon in everyday conversation, talking about optimizing family time and leveraging assets. He was echoing Tiffany. The first time he asked me for money, it was casual. "Mom, Tiff and I are a little short this month. The wedding costs were more than we budgeted for. Could you help us out with a few thousand, just until my bonus comes in?" I wrote the check without hesitation. He was my son. Of course, I would help him. David and I had always been careful with our money. We lived modestly, and David's life insurance had left me comfortable, not wealthy, but secure. A month later, it was for a down payment on a new luxury SUV for Tiffany. "She needs a reliable car to drive the kids, Mom. It's a safety issue." Again, I wrote the check, pushing down the uneasy feeling in my gut. This wasn't my Marcus. My Marcus was proud. He was the man who, as a teenager, had worked a whole summer to buy his own first car, a beat-up Ford Escort, because he didn't want to ask us for the money. Now he was asking without a hint of shame, his wife's desires becoming his necessities. The storm had arrived, and I was standing right in its path, too blinded by love to see the devastation it would bring. The requests for babysitting started as all insidious things do, innocently. It was a phone call on a Friday afternoon. "Mom," Marcus's voice was warm, the one he used when he wanted something. "Tiffany and I have a last-minute invitation to a gallery opening tonight. It's a huge networking opportunity for her. Would you be an absolute lifesaver and watch the twins for a few hours?" Of course, I said yes. What grandmother would? I drove the 45 minutes to their sterile White House. The twins were, as usual, absorbed in their electronics. Tiffany gave me a breezy Eurostar Aliner and a list of instructions that included gluten-free snacks and a strict bedtime routine. They came home after midnight smelling of wine and expensive perfume. I was exhausted, but I told myself it was a one-time thing. It was my duty as a mother, as a grandmother, to help. But it wasn't a one-time thing. A week later, it was a critical client dinner. The week after that, a team-building weekend retreat for Tiffany's company. Suddenly, I was spending 2 or 3 nights a week at their house, sleeping in a guest room that felt as personal as a hotel room. My own home began to feel neglected. My prize-winning roses in the garden were starting to wilt. I missed my Wednesday night Bible study, then my Friday afternoon bridge game. When I tried to explain I had plans, Marcus would lay on the guilt. "But Mom, this is really important for Tiffany's career. You know how hard she works. We're a team, we have to support each other." The implication was clear. I was part of that support team. My role, it seemed, was to be the unpaid on-call caregiver. The twins, Brandon and Brittany, regarded me with a polite indifference. They weren't bad children, just entitled. They were used to getting what they wanted. They spoke to me only to issue commands. "Can you get me a juice? The Wi-Fi isn't working. Brittany's bothering me." There was no warmth, no affection. I was a functionary, a service provider. I tried. I baked them cookies, which they refused because they weren't organic. I tried to teach them how to play checkers, a game Marcus had loved as a boy, but they dismissed it as boring. One Tuesday, I had a doctor's appointment, a routine checkup I'd scheduled months in advance. At 10 in the morning, my phone rang. It was Marcus. "Mom, disaster. The nanny called in sick. Tiffany has a huge presentation at 1 o'clock. She can't miss it. I need you to come over right now." "Marcus, honey, I can't," I said, my heart starting to beat a little faster. "I have my annual checkup with Dr. Miller at 1:30. I can't cancel it. His office has a strict policy." There was a frustrated sigh on the other end of the line. "Mom, can't you just reschedule? This is Tiffany's career we're talking about. It's a huge deal. A doctor's appointment is just a doctor's appointment." "My health is not just anything, Marcus," I said, a rare firmness in my voice. "I am 78 years old. These appointments are important." "Fine," he snapped, his voice cold. "I guess I'll have to be the one to miss my own important meeting and screw up my own career because my mother can't do a simple favor. Don't worry about it. We'll figure it out. Tiffany will just have to cancel. I'm sure her boss will understand." The emotional blackmail was thick and suffocating. He hung up before I could reply. I sat there, my hand trembling as I held the phone. I felt a wave of guilt so powerful it almost made me call him back. But then a flicker of something else sparked within me. Anger. David had worked his fingers to the bone to make sure his son would be a man of integrity. And here that son was, trying to manipulate his elderly mother into neglecting her health for his wife's convenience. I went to my doctor's appointment, but the victory felt hollow. The joy of my quiet life was being systematically dismantled, and I was letting it happen. The final straw in this slow erosion of my spirit came a few months later. My church, the same one where I'd met David and baptized Marcus, was organizing a seniors bus trip to see the autumn leaves in the Blue Ridge Mountains. It was a 3-day trip, a pilgrimage of sorts for my friends and me. I had been looking forward to it for a year. I'd paid my deposit and was already planning what sweaters to pack. 2 weeks before the trip, Marcus called. "Great news, Mom. Tiffany's company is sending us to a conference in the Bahamas, all expenses paid. It's the same week as your leaf peeping thing, so I will just drop the kids at your house on our way to the airport." It wasn't a question, it was a declaration. He just assumed I would cancel my plans, the plans I had happily told him about weeks before. I took a deep breath. Marcus, I can't. I told you about my bus tour with the church ladies. It's all paid for. I'm not going to miss it. You're kidding, right? He actually laughed, a short, sharp, disbelieving sound. Mom, it's a bus trip. You can see leaves anytime. This is the Bahamas. It's a huge perk for Tiffany. We can't just turn it down. And we can't take the twins. It's a corporate event. Then you will have to hire a babysitter, Marcus, I said, my voice as level as I could make it. Your wife's perks are not my responsibility. My trip is important to me. The friendly warmth in his voice vanished, replaced by an icy fury. I cannot believe how selfish you're being after everything we do for you. Everything you do for me? The words were out of my mouth before I could stop them. What exactly is it that you do for me, Marcus? Other than expect me to drop my entire life the second Tiffany snaps her fingers. The line went silent for a moment. I could hear Tiffany's sharp voice in the background feeding him lines. Then Marcus came back on, his voice low and dangerous. You know what, Mom? I think you need to get your priorities straight. The silence on the phone was heavy, a prelude to a battle I could feel brewing in my bones. I could hear Tiffany's angry, muffled tones in the background like a hornet buzzing just out of sight. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was stripped of all warmth, all filial affection. It was the voice of a stranger, a corporate negotiator delivering a final offer. Listen to me very carefully, Mom, he began, his tone condescending, as if he were explaining a complex concept to a child. Tiffany and I are building a life here. We work hard. We have important careers. Family is supposed to be a support system. That's what it is. A system where everyone contributes. I have contributed, I said, my own voice trembling slightly with a mixture of fear and rage. I have given you everything, Marcus. Your father and I gave you everything. That was then, he shot back, his voice rising. We're not talking about the past, we're talking about now. Right now, what we need is help with the kids. It's that simple. We need a reliable, trustworthy person who loves them. That person is supposed to be you. It's the role of a grandmother. My role is not to be your free, 24/7 nanny, Marcus. I have a life of my own. I have friends. I have plans. That trip is important to me. More important than your family? He scoffed. The question was a dagger aimed right at my heart, and he knew it. My family was the sun around which my entire world had revolved for 50 years. That's a cruel thing to say, I whispered. It's the truth, he insisted. I could hear Tiffany egging him on, her voice a poisonous whisper. It's time to make a choice, Mom. That's what this comes down to. You're either part of this family, our family, the one that exists now, or you're not. You either step up and help us when we need you, starting with this trip to the Bahamas, or you can have your little bus tour and your church friends. But you can't have both. I was stunned into silence, an ultimatum. My own son, the boy whose scraped knees I had kissed, whose fevers I had nursed, whose heartbreaks I had mended, was delivering an ultimatum. He was asking me to choose between my own life and his love. It felt like the ground had split open beneath my feet. Marcus, I said, my voice barely audible, please don't do this. The choice is yours, he said, his voice cold and final. Let me know what you decide. The flight is on Tuesday. If you're not here to take the kids, we'll have our answer. We'll know exactly where we stand, and we'll act accordingly. He hung up. The dial tone buzzed in my ear, a monotonous, indifferent sound. I slowly placed the receiver back in its cradle. The house was utterly still. The grandfather clock in the hallway, a wedding gift from my parents, ticked loudly, marking the seconds of my new, shattered reality. I sank down onto the floral sofa, the one David and I had picked out together 30 years ago. I stared at the wall of photographs opposite me. There was Marcus at his college graduation, beaming, his arm around me. There he was with Sarah and his own children, David Jr., and Maya, a picture of happy, normal family life. There was the last photo I had of David, taken a month before he died, his arm around my shoulders, his smile weak but still full of love. He was telling me to choose, to erase my own identity, my own needs, my own simple joys, and become a servant to his new life. If I said no, I would lose my son. I would lose access to his life and, by extension, the last real piece of my family I had left, the loneliness I had felt since David's. Death threatened to swallow me whole. The thought of that silence, once just a dull ache, becoming a permanent, screaming void was terrifying. My first instinct was to surrender, to call him back, apologize, and tell him of course I would cancel my trip. Of course I would be there. What was a bus tour compared to my son's affection? But then another thought, quiet and stubborn, pushed its way through the panic. It was the voice of my 78 years of life, the echo of my husband's pride, the whisper of my own self-worth I thought I had lost. What kind of love comes with conditions? What kind of son puts a price tag on his mother's presence in his life? He had asked me to choose. As I sat there in the deafening silence of my home, the home built on unconditional love, I realized with a shocking and painful clarity that he had already made his. He had chosen Tiffany and the life she represented over the mother who had given him everything. The ultimatum wasn't a choice he was offering me. It was a sentence he was delivering, and the crime was my refusal to be erased. I did not call him back. I sat on that sofa until the sun went down and the room grew dark around me. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I wept not for my dead husband, but for my living son. Tuesday came and went. I did not go to Marcus's house. I did not call. My phone remained silent, a black brick of judgment on the hall table. Every time I walked past it, my stomach clenched. Part of me, the mother part that was woven into my very DNA, screamed at me to pick it up, to dial his number, to beg for forgiveness and fix what was broken. But a deeper, older part of me, the part that was just a leaner, refused. The following Sunday, I packed my bag, my hands moving with a strange, dreamlike slowness. I got on the bus with the ladies from my church. I smiled when they greeted me. I commented on the crisp autumn air. I looked out the window as the bus pulled away from the church parking lot, watching my town shrink in the distance. I tried to feel the excitement I had anticipated for months, but all I felt was a profound and terrifying hollowness. It was as if I had stepped out of my own body and was watching a stranger go through the motions. The Blue Ridge Mountains were breathtaking. The leaves were a riot of color, crimson, gold, and fiery orange, a painter's palette splashed across the rolling hills. My friends oohed and awed. They took pictures, they laughed and shared stories. I sat amongst them, a ghost at the feast. Every beautiful vista was a reminder of what I had chosen and what I had lost. I imagined Marcus and Tiffany in the Bahamas, sipping drinks on a white sand beach, angry and resentful. I imagined them hiring an expensive, last-minute nanny and complaining about the cost, blaming me for their inconvenience. I imagined them telling the twins that grandma didn't love them enough to help. The trip was only 3 days, but it felt like a lifetime. When I returned, the silence in my house was different. It was no longer just the quiet of an empty nest, it was the active, aggressive silence of ostracism. The daily check-in calls from Marcus had stopped entirely. Weeks bled into a month. Thanksgiving approached, a holiday that had always been a cornerstone of our family life. Surely, I thought, he would call for Thanksgiving. He wouldn't let a holiday that was so important to his father pass in silence. But he didn't. Thanksgiving Day, I roasted a small chicken for one. I made a small portion of stuffing and cranberry sauce. I sat at my dining room table, set for one, and stared at the empty chairs. The chair where David always sat, the chair where Marcus sat since he was a boy, the high chairs that had held his own children. The weight of their absence was a physical presence in the room. I could not eat. I scraped the untouched food into the trash, wrapped the chicken for leftovers I would never eat, and went to bed before the sun had fully set. The abyss of loneliness was deeper and darker than I ever could have imagined. I stopped going to my bridge club. What was I supposed to say when my friends asked about Marcus? How could I explain that my only son had disowned me because I wouldn't babysit? The shame was a heavy cloak I couldn't seem to take off. I even started skipping church services, slipping in late for Bible study, and leaving early to avoid the well-meaning inquiries of the other parishioners. My world shrank to the four walls of my house. I spent my days drifting from room to room, haunted by memories. I'd pick up a photograph of Marcus as a toddler, his face smeared with chocolate, and my chest would ache with a grief so sharp it stole my breath. I was mourning a loss more profound than death because my son was still out there, living and breathing, and he had chosen for me not to be a part of his life. I felt like a failure. Where had I gone wrong? Had I loved him too much? Had I not been strict? Enough had I created the man who was now capable of such casual cruelty. The questions circled in my mind, a relentless vortex of self-doubt and sorrow. Christmas came. I sent cards and presents to my grandchildren, David Jr. and Maya, as I always did. I received a polite thank you call from their mother, Sarah. She asked how I was, and I lied and said I was fine. She asked if I was seeing Marcus for the holidays. I lied again and said we had celebrated early. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. On Christmas Day, a courier delivered a small, impersonal floral arrangement to my door. The card simply read, "Happy Holidays." Marcus and Tiffany. It wasn't an olive branch. It was a corporate memo, a sterile acknowledgement of a relationship that was now purely transactional. I put the flowers in the sink and didn't bother to find a vase. I watched them wilt over the next few days, a perfect metaphor for my hope. January was a month of gray skies and frozen ground. My spirit felt much the same. I had lost weight. My sleep was filled with anxious dreams. The house felt less like a home and more like a tomb. I was fading, and a part of me didn't care. One cold Tuesday afternoon, there was a firm, persistent knock on my front door. My first instinct was to ignore it, as I did with most things from the outside world now. But the knocking didn't stop. It was steady, patient, and insistent. With a heavy sigh, I pulled my robe tighter around myself and went to the door. I peered through the peephole and my heart sank. It was Reverend James Peterson. Reverend Peterson was more than just my pastor. He had been David's best friend since they were boys. He had been the best man at our wedding and had delivered the eulogy at David's funeral. He was a tall, kind man with eyes that had seen a lifetime of joy and sorrow and had learned to hold both with grace. I couldn't face his gentle questions. I couldn't bear his pity. I stood there frozen, hoping he would go away, but he didn't. He just knocked again, softer this time. "Eleanor," he called through the door, his voice calm and kind. "I know you're in there. Sister Mary from the hospitality committee said she saw your car in the driveway. I'm not leaving until you open this door. I'll stand here in the cold all day if I have to." Defeated, I turned the lock and opened the door a crack. He stood on my porch, a container of what I knew was his wife's famous chicken soup in his hands, his face a mixture of concern and resolve. He didn't wait for an invitation. He just gently pushed the door open and stepped inside, bringing the cold winter air with him. "The Lord's house has been missing its most faithful servant, Eleanor," he said softly, looking around at the dusty living room, the stack of unread newspapers on the coffee table. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I felt the dam of my composure begin to crack. I hadn't realized how disheveled I had become. My hair was uncombed, and I was still in the chenille robe I'd been wearing for 2 days. "I haven't been feeling well," I mumbled, turning away so he couldn't see the tears welling in my eyes. "I can see that," he said, his voice devoid of judgment. He walked into the kitchen as if he owned the place, put the soup on the counter, and started looking through my cabinets for a pot. "Your friends are worried, Eleanor. I am worried. You've weathered storms that would have broken most people. It's not like you to hide from the rain." He found a pot and started warming the soup. The simple, domestic act was so disarming that I finally broke. The tears I had been holding back for months came in a hot, silent rush. I sank onto a kitchen chair and covered my face with my hands. He let me cry. He didn't say a word. He just turned off the stove, poured the soup into 2 bowls, and sat down at the table across from me. He waited until my sobs subsided into shuddering breaths. "Tell me what's happened, Eleanor," he said, his voice a gentle command. And so I told him everything, the escalating demands, the entitled attitude of Tiffany and her children, the way Marcus had changed, the ultimatum, the silence, the soul-crushing loneliness. The shame. I poured out all the poison that had been filling my heart for months. He listened patiently, his dark eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, my voice raw and hoarse, he was quiet for a long moment, stirring his soup. "Eleanor," he said finally, his voice deep and resonant, "David Vance was the proudest man I ever knew. He was proud of his work, he was proud of his family, but most of all, he was proud of his wife. He used to tell me, 'James, my Eleanor is made of steel and velvet.' He knew your strength, even when you forgot it yourself." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "What your son has done is a sin. It is a sin against the fifth commandment to honor thy father and mother. but the sin you are committing against yourself is almost as grievous. You allowing him to diminish you. You are letting him convince you that your worth is tied to your utility. That is not the gospel, Alina. That is not the truth. But he's my son, I whispered, my only son. And you are his mother. A mother's love is a mighty and terrible thing, Alina, but it is not a doormat, it is not a blank check for disrespect. Tell me something, he said, his gaze sharpening. The house Marcus and that woman live in, the one you told me you let them move into after they married. I was confused by the change of subject. Yes, the one in the gated community, they rent it. No, not that one, he clarified patiently. I'm talking about the house he lived in before with his first wife, Sarah, the smaller brick house over on Elm Street, the one you and David bought as an investment property years ago. I had almost forgotten about that. After Marcus and Sarah divorced, Marcus had stayed in that house for a while before he met Tiffany. It was a lovely, sturdy three-bedroom home in a good neighborhood. When he and Tiffany decided to rent their lavish new place, they'd wanted to sell the Elm Street house to fund their lifestyle. I had resisted. That house was part of David's legacy, so we'd come to an agreement. They could keep their things there and use it as a rental property to generate income. The deed, however, remained solely in my name. I had never gotten around to changing it. Marcus said it was easier for tax purposes that way. They have a tenant in there, I said slowly, my mind starting to churn. The rental income goes directly to their bank account. They use it to pay for their car, their vacations. Reverend Peterson nodded, a grim understanding on his face. Alina, what would David say if he knew that the fruits of his labor, the very bricks and mortar he sweat for, were being used to finance the life of people who treat his widow with such profound disrespect? The question hit me like a physical blow. I thought of David, of his calloused hands, of his exhausted body at the end of a long day. I thought of his pride, his integrity. He would be horrified. He would be furious. He would never, ever stand for me being treated this way. He would never stand for it, I said aloud, my voice gaining a strength I hadn't felt in months. No, he would not, the Reverend agreed. That house, Alina, is not just a property, it's your power, it's your security. It is the legacy David left to protect you, not to enable the poor choices of a grown man who has lost his way. You have been mourning what you've lost. It's time to start fighting for what you have left. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card. This is my nephew, Thomas. He's a lawyer, a good one, smart and tough. He specializes in property and family law. Call him. Let him help you protect what is rightfully yours. I looked down at the card. Thomas Peterson, attorney at law. For the first time since that terrible phone call, a flicker of light pierced the gray fog of my despair. It wasn't about revenge. It was about respect. It was about honoring my husband. It was about reclaiming myself. Reverend Peterson saw the shift in my eyes. He smiled, a genuine, warm smile. There she is, he said softly. There's the steal. After he left, I did not put the card away. I walked over to the phone, my steps sure and steady. I picked up the receiver and dialed the number. I was no longer a victim waiting by the phone. I was Alina Vance, and I was taking back control. The months that followed were a quiet revolution. Working with Thomas Peterson, the Reverend's nephew, was like waking a dormant part of my brain. He was sharp, compassionate, and fiercely protective. He laid out my options with clarity and patience. The Elm Street house was mine, free and clear. The rental agreement with the current tenants was on a month-to-month basis. The income that Marcus and Tiffany had been collecting was, legally speaking, my income. We have two paths, Mrs. Vance, Thomas explained in his quiet office. We can send them a bill for all the rent they've collected, which will certainly lead to a nasty fight, or we can take the cleaner path. We give the tenants a legal and generous notice to vacate, and we put the house on the market. We sever the financial tie completely. Sever the tie, the words resonated deep within me. That was what this was about, not punishment, but freedom. Let's sell the house, I said without a moment's hesitation. While the legal gears were turning, I began to rebuild my own life. I started going back to church, holding my head high. I rejoined my bridge club and hosted the next game at my house, which I had cleaned from top to bottom. I worked in my garden pulling weeds with a vengeance, nurturing my roses back to health. I was rediscovering the simple rhythms and joys that Marcus and Tiffany had tried to steal from me. I was a leaner Vance again. The inevitable phone call. LL came on a sunny afternoon in early April. I was pruning my prize-winning piece, roses, when the phone rang. I saw Marcus's name on the caller ID, and for the first time I felt no fear, only a calm, steady resolve. Mom, his voice was tight with panic. There was no greeting, no apology for the months of silence. Hello, Marcus, I said, my voice evened. What have you done? He demanded. I just got a call from our tenants on Elm Street. They said they got an eviction notice from some lawyer on your behalf. They said the house is being sold. What is going on? I am selling my property, Marcus, I stated simply. Your property, that's our rental income, that's our house. We've been counting on that money. Tiffany just lost her job, her company is downsizing. We're in a real bind here, Mom, we need that money. The sheer, unadulterated entitlement of his words was breathtaking. After months of shunning me, his first contact was to demand access to my assets. The last vestiges of my maternal guilt withered and died in that moment. No, Marcus, I said, my voice as calm as the spring afternoon. It is my house. It has always been my house. It was part of the legacy your father and I built, a legacy you have shown no respect for. The tenants have been given 60 days' notice, which is more than the law requires. The house will be listed for sale on June 1st. He was sputtering on the other end of the line. You can't do this. This is going to ruin us. We're going to lose the house we're in now. We have nowhere to go. That sounds like a difficult situation, I said, my voice betraying no emotion. You are a grown man, Marcus. A man with a degree that your father and I sacrificed for. I am sure you will figure something out. Figure something out, will be homeless. Is that what you want, for your own son to be on the street? What I want, I said, my voice hardening just a fraction, is to be treated with respect. What I want is to live my remaining years in peace, not as an on-call servant. You gave me an ultimatum, Marcus. You told me to choose, I made my choice, and now you have to live with the consequences of yours. I could hear Tiffany screaming in the background, a litany of curses and accusations. Marcus came back on the line, his voice dripping with venom. You'll regret this, you old woman. You'll be all alone in that big house with your money and your precious roses, and you'll have no one. You'll die alone. No, Marcus, I said softly, a profound sense of peace settling over me. I am not alone. I have my friends, I have my community, I have my memories of a good man, and most importantly, I have my self-respect. That is something no amount of money can buy, and something you, it seems, have willingly sold. I hung up the phone. I did not tremble. I did not cry. I turned back to my roses, snipped a perfect, creamy white blossom, and went inside to put it in a vase. The house sold in less than a week for more than I could have imagined. Marcus and Tiffany did not, of course, end up on the street. Her parents, I heard through the church grapevine, bylaid them out, and they moved into a small apartment across town. I never heard from them again. With the proceeds from the house and the security of my own finances, I did something David and I had always talked about. I worked with Reverend Peterson and the church board to establish the David Vance Youth Center, an after-school program for children in our community, providing tutoring, hot meals, and a safe place to go. I sit on the board, and twice a week I volunteer in the library reading stories to children who look at me with warmth and affection. They call me Grandma Aliner. The pain of losing a child, even a grown one, is a scar that never fully fades. There are moments late at night when I feel a pang of sadness for the boy my son once was. But that sadness is quickly replaced by a quiet, fierce gratitude for the woman his actions forced me to become. I learned the hardest lesson of my life at 78 years old, that some people will mistake your love for weakness, your kindness for an endless resource to be exploited. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for them is to turn off the tap. You cannot force someone to value you. That is a lesson they must learn on their own. I found my purpose not in being a mother to a man who no longer deserved it, but in being a matriarch to a community that needed one. I am not alone. I am surrounded by the laughter of children and the respect of my peers. I am at peace.